welcome to our live. This is Seth Insua. He is
Hello.
not only a nice chap, but he's a debut novelist, and his debut novel, Human Animal, is a nice read. I really liked it. Yay!
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah. How's it going? It's been out for 2 weeks now?
It's been out for just over a week officially. Yeah. It was the Thursday before last. So, yeah, a week and a couple of days.
Right.
Which is, it's been a bit of a whirlwind, really. Been a few weeks of quite intense promotion and doing events. I've got a few more events lined up over the next few months. I painted a couple of shop windows, which is something that I've never done before. And yeah, it's going well. It's been a lot of fun.
But I think that we can skip over that, but Seth's also an amazing illustrator, which is probably why someone's asked him to do a show. It's not just a sort of random act of, like.
Yeah, I'm just vandalizing shop windows. Yeah.
I'm just flinging paint on things to promote my book. That's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah, I mean, you say that I'm an illustrator, and I am, but I had never done this before. Like, I'd never painted on glass before. I'd never used that kind of paint before, and it really was a learning curve that I had to master pretty quickly because, yeah, I wanted it to look good, and I had until the shop closed to achieve that. And like when I was putting the paint on the glass, there was nothing to hold it. It was like sliding around. It goes on really thinly, and yeah, it was quite challenging.
And you sent some beautiful postcards with the book when you were sending out preview copies. But were you tempted to try and like illustrate the cover, or was this something that was just never going to happen?
I mean, that was definitely something that was in the back of my mind always. I wanted to trust my publisher, Verve Books, who've been brilliant. But when they asked me to submit a mood board and to kind of come up with some ideas, I did have a stab at like doing a photo collage and just like, graphic designing my own cover. But I really like horror, and my book is not horror. And without even realizing it, I came up with a really frightening image and I sent it to them, and they took a few days to reply, and then they came back and said, Seth, why is it so scary? And fair enough. So we went with their much better cover idea with this, plaintive looking cow, which I love.
It's hilarious. They've sort of taken a couple of days. They're like, guessing at your mental state. They're just like, is he okay?
What's wrong with him? Yeah, I think they were just like, oh God, how do we tell him? But yeah, I've done some little kind of promotional illustrations for the book for socials, and I did get a few comments saying, "Oh, will you illustrate the book itself?" But I think when you illustrate a book, you kind of change the reader's expectations of its contents. So I'm not sure that's maybe for a future book, but maybe not for this one.
Or maybe like future edition. I think it would be
maybe.
That is an interesting thought. I hadn't really considered that. That you're suddenly kind of interfering with the reader's conception of the world of the book. Quite forcefully in a way. You're not going to sort of completely skip over the illustrations, are you? So, yeah, that is a really interesting thought. I hadn't ever considered that. How is the book going? Tell us about your successes.
Well, it's been selected for the BBC Radio 2 Book Club, which is just madness, really. It's been really surreal. I went down to New Broadcasting House in London for an interview with Sarah Cox, who was absolutely lovely. And also, she's the daughter of a farmer herself. So I guess she related to a lot of the themes in the book. And we had a great chat, had a lovely time. And then, I mean, like, there's going to be a new edition of it already with a very slightly different cover with things moved around with new like press quotes and that kind of things. So I don't know, like it's very early days, so the response seems to be positive so far, and I feel like it's a book with very divisive themes at its heart, and I don't feel like I've really enraged anybody yet. I think I've provoked some discussions maybe, which was the aim. I don't think I've upset anybody.
I think this is a good point because tell us a bit of a précis about the book. It's a really I found it was really sort of skillfully done. How it did bring together a lot of the different themes, some of which are quite sort of timely, and others are quite timeless. Really, yeah. Tell us a little bit, like
Thank
what
you.
is the book about?
Okay, so the book Human Animal, it is set on a family dairy farm that goes back many generations, and it's really important to the identity of the family. And they're struggling to make ends meet, as so many farms are these days. And then one morning, a group of animal rights activists called Livestock Aid descend on the cowshed to get some footage for their social media. And they end up recording a calf who has died. And the footage goes viral, and as the farm is named and shamed online, and farm, the family sort of closes ranks, it becomes apparent that the farmer's youngest son, Tom, who's recently returned from university with some radical new ideas, announced that he's vegan and sort of hidden himself away in his childhood bedroom with some secrets about his gender identity, basically things that he can't talk to his family about, has something to do the uh, with the activist being on the farm in the first place. And yeah, it kind of unravels from there. There's this journal written by a German prisoner of war who worked on the farm in the 1940s that slowly comes to light and reveals other things about the history of the family. It's really a story about survival. I was influenced by Thomas Hardy, Tess of D'Urbervilles, and just like all of his historical fiction that took a kind of Darwinian approach to plot and was thinking about survival of the fittest and how we cope with change and how we respond to change. And so I wanted to write about things where people's fundamental identities in a family were at odds, were clashing, and they were never going to be able to get over those identities. Like they weren't going to be able to change who they were. So they could either pretend to be something else, or they could go their separate ways and never speak to each other again, or they could find some common ground. Because I think in my own life experiences, I have had things about me growing up, things that have been very challenging to deal with, and we have found a way forward. And it hasn't been, you know, because we've been able to convince each other of our perspectives. It's been more that we've sort of learned to accept. And I think when there is love there, it can be really destabilizing and disorientating when you find you have fundamentally opposing views. And we just live in such a polarized world at the moment, now more than ever. So, yeah.
I think that's fascinating. When, yeah, with if you do love each other, then it's harder. You are forced to find a way through these things. I mean, if you don't, then like you say, in a sort of you see this online in a polarized environment, you just go, okay, well, you're dead to me, you're done.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But
yeah, because I suppose like with families, there are a lot of people who go no contact, and if that's what's best for them, then fine. But I also think that there is a hopeful possibility of finding that common ground again. And we talk, but particularly in like queer circles, there's like a lot of queerness in this book, and there's a lot of talk about like chosen family, and I think chosen family is a really important thing, and can be a real lifeline. Um, but it is also possible to heal when um, yeah, it's possible to heal when you have a huge rupture, even when you think that it's impossible, and like the most natural thing is to just like run away. um, yeah.
yeah, talk to me a little bit about Tess and the D'Urbervilles. I love that book. Growing up, it was one of my kind of early favorite literary novels, I suppose. Yeah,
Same.
I loved it. So yeah, so talk to me a little bit about your relationship with that book and like when you came across it and that sort of thing.
So I think I read it when I was about 16, and it was when I was first starting to dive into the classics, and my mum recommended it. And funnily enough, her memory of it was that it was just like this super romantic book that, I don't know, I think she's just like, oh, it's such a dreamy book, like it's so great. There's this scene where like he carries her across the stream or something. And then I read it and was like, bloody hell, this is dark.
This is
This is
savage.
like so depressing. um, but yeah, I think the thing about that is it's all about social change and agricultural change, and how that affects um, the working classes, and how um, essentially how like what might have been considered a virtuous character or a virtuous personality may actually be the worst inherent um, kind of character that you could have in a world that has become so transactional and soulless and mechanized. And people talk a lot about how Hardy writes these sort of fatalistic plots that are everything's predetermined, and I think he says in his narration quite a lot like the fates had decided
Mm,
that this was in store. But it's a little bit more than that. It's that the fates have decided that that is going to happen because the character is somebody who just will not thrive in this world. Um, and I found that really interesting that he was writing at a time when like Darwinian's theory of evolution by natural selection had finally become, um, something that was popular and talked about and debated, and it was really zeitgeisty. And yeah, and so he kind of fed that into his plots in a way that other authors hadn't previously done. Um, I just thought that was really cool and also just very true as a sort of metaphor for how our lives play out. I think that Darwinism is, yeah, is a useful way of looking at it. And then I also just felt that, I don't know, like I didn't want to write something quite as bleak, but I think I wanted to write something where you really, really empathize with the protagonists, and where even when they're making kind of foolish decisions or like you're reading between your fingers, you can still connect with them. And yeah, I think Hardy does that a lot. Like he really pulls on your heartstrings.
mm. I think that idea of virtue and leading to a kind of unbending and eventually kind of unsympathetic sort of position is an interesting. And I think with the father in this is that sort of the ground is shifting under his feet in all these different ways, isn't it? And I think it is easy for that to make an unsympathetic character. I think we've all got the idea of the kind of the old grumpy farmer who yeah, like
Yeah.
wants to do things the good old ways and can't understand what's going on. I think we've all got that idea, but I think what you did do a really good job of is making him a sympathetic character, particularly as the book progresses later on. Yeah, I
Thank you.
think the Darwin idea, obviously these farms exist in an ecosystem, and the market knows best, sort of thing, is a kind of increasingly pervasive line of reasoning, maybe. And
Hmm,
yeah,
hmm.
the idea that these farms, are they relevant? Like, do we need them? And
Hmm.
I mean,
I
these are
mean, this
fascinating
is the thing
questions.
though. It's the farms that are going to succeed if things continue going the way that they are like the enormous factory farms where everything is like hyper industrialized and efficient, but kind of like in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, like the more virtuous or seemingly virtuous um, the businesses are the ones that are going to die out. It's like the smaller family farms that are struggling to keep going, and yeah, that there's a very interesting tension there with obviously veganism is all about animal rights and about not harming other living creatures. But if that pressure then closes down the family dairy farms, you're just going to be left with big businesses that don't care at all about the animals, where the animals
Mm,
really are just because I think with like family farms there is usually a lot of love for animals and relationships between the farmers and their animals. And they kind of have this very old fashioned understanding of like, I respect you, even though I'm going to take your life. And ultimately, um, that's how this works. But they don't consider themselves to be people who don't like animals. They just have a completely different value system around it.
yeah, and I think there is a sort of, however you interact with the world with your kind of consumption choices, there is a harm at a certain point. and
Yeah,
how
it's really
and
difficult.
it is a very nuanced. I don't think it's something we're going to unpick in this, in this
No.
conversation. It is very like when you start going down that road, it is a very confrontational sort of discussion. And one of my oldest friends is a vegan and has been for a long time now. The one thing that because they actually do live on a working farm, but they farm flowers, so they're not kind of farming animals, but they do have um, chickens and geese, and they eat they eat those eggs. So that's the kind of dietary sort of concession he makes because he feels like that is fine in
Yeah.
his sort of series of decisions. But his dad is still, sort of 10-ish years after the fact, sort of needling him about being a vegan, and when you're out for dinner, being like, "Oh, well, I suppose," and you're like, "Have you not gotten bored of this?" This kind of like argument. It is quite an
I think
interesting.
that, yeah, the sort of parental impulse to project onto your children and to mold them into your own image is obviously like incredibly strong. And even after you've sort of let go of one thing, there'll be something else that yeah, that comes up. I think that was something that I wanted to do with the father figure in my book as well, is to kind of show that he's not just, he's not just emblematic of his generation or whatever. He is an individual who has been shaped by his own experiences, as his own parents were before. And we're all just, grown up children. And we're all vulnerable. And yeah, just because someone is in a position of responsibility and they're older and, they have all of this um, experience and wisdom, whatever, they're still just a grown up child. So, yeah, like the farmer in my book didn't actually want to be a farmer. And I think,
Mm.
like, for the reader, when you first start reading it, you're like, oh God, like, this is a person who, this is their vocation. Like, they love this always. And it's like, no, they actually also are trying to step up after their brother died. And they have been the kind of disappointing son themselves. So they relate to their child more than you would think.
I think at no point do you get the impression he doesn't care as well. He finds these things aggravating, and he finds them confusing, but he is someone who is, in his way, sort of reaching for a solution. And some things, I think what happens really well is, some things you can't solve. Some things aren't problems to be solved. They're, like you say, they're people or views to accept, and then how you go about doing that sort of will shape the remainder of your relationship with this person. And the easy thing to do is to say, "See you later." That is easy. That is easy because, while there is, I think you used the word rupture. While there is a rupture, um, it is a solution. You kind of don't have to think about it. Whereas, yeah, to love somebody and remain in a relationship with them, whether that's, the parental love in this or in another way, it is harder work, really, because it's ongoing.
Yeah, yeah, that's completely true. Yeah, it's something that you to maintain relationships, you have to keep choosing them and you have
Mm.
to keep building them.
And I think with the farm too, yeah, to particularly like you said, if you're forced into a corner where you have to sort of step up to the plate and take over the family business, and if that's, you have to sort of subsume yourself to it, and it's and to keep choosing that and to keep waking up at 4 in the morning and putting your boots on and getting outside, it's
Oh
pretty,
man, yeah.
pretty rough stuff, really. I mean, you clearly really understand, the sort of the agricultural landscape. And was this part of your upbringing, or what's your relationship with farming, I
In a way, I did not grow up on a farm, but I grew up in the middle of nowhere surrounded by farms.
suppose?
Um, so yeah, to get it right, I did a lot of research. Like I read so many books. Probably got to a point where it was just procrastination. Where I was like, I'll read another one and another one. Um, but yeah, like it was really. I mean, respect to farmers. Like whatever your point of view is on this stuff, like that is hard work. They are doing it every single day, in rain or shine. So yeah, I really wanted to make sure that I got all of the details right. I Yeah, my family love animals. um, grew up around animals, and my dad, who's Spanish, grew up um, in a house where they kept lots of livestock inside. So like they had cows in the house on the ground floor, and they would have fresh milk in the mornings, and he would like pet the cows on the way through to his grandma's kitchen and that sort of thing. Um, so yeah, I like cows. Cows are great.
I think, similarly, I grew up in a small village, and when we sort of drove into school every day, if you left slightly too late, then the farmer would have put the rope across the road and would be moving the cows, and you'd be sat there for a few minutes, and you'd get annoyed. But yeah, you were in this sort of, you developed this respect, and also it was almost an admonishment of you for being late. It was like, well, if you're
Yeah,
late,
this is this is on you.
yeah, exactly. It's like the farmer's not, they're not, they can't be late, because the herd gets twitchy. They
Yeah,
need to move them every day, and you're the
yeah.
you're the one who has the sort of luxury of being late. These other people, these animals are not dependent on you. They're super dependent on the farmer, and it's very, they are wonderful. I think, and animals turn adults into children. I think, they are kind of endlessly interesting.
Hmm.
Tell me a
Yeah.
little bit about the books you were reading then. So you said you did loads of research. Were these fiction, non-fiction books? What books went into
Non-fiction.
it?
I mean, I've got the book here so I can give you some examples from the acknowledgements, because I listed them all to say thank you.
You
But yeah,
did.
it was like memoirs, for instance, Sally Irwin's A Farmer's Diary, Adam Henson, A Farmer and His Dog, Richard Cornock, A Year on a Dairy Farm. That was really useful because I could go through all of the different seasons and work out like what was happening at different times,
Mm.
and then think about things like, okay, like what flowers would be in bloom then, and like what would the land actually be like, and what birds would be around. John Lewis Stemple's just a brilliant nature writer. If anyone hasn't read him before, I would highly recommend him. The Running Hare is absolutely beautiful, and it's about him kind of trying to restore wildlife to an area of land that has been kind of completely ravaged. Um, yeah, I mean, I read quite widely, and actually, I it was through doing this research that I started reading about dairy farming in the 1940s and even before that, and reading about how things changed, and that's what inspired the 1940s part of the story because I wanted to show just how much dairy farming's reputation has plummeted, and how it was originally considered like an incredibly noble, wholesome profession, and it was associated with this sort of pastoral idyll, um, and yeah, and that just kind of like led me into another branch of the story that was contrasted, but also like there are strong parallels in the challenges that the characters are facing.
That was one of my favorite bits. I think I loved the 1940s, and partly
Oh, that's
because,
good to hear.
yeah, without spoiling anything, but there's he's essentially a prisoner of war, isn't he? He's a German
Hmm.
prisoner of war, and he's working rather than kind of sitting around in a prison. He is out there working on the land, and you just think, wow, this
Yeah.
happened. It's something I hadn't
Yeah, this
considered.
was really common.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that I'd
I
not
didn't know
really
that before
considered.
either. But this is the thing that then the prisoners of war quite often form.
Oh, lost Seth quickly. Oh, I got you back.
Okay, we're back.
And you
Um,
look in higher definition, so this is great.
oh, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
How weird.
Yeah.
What was I saying? Prisoners of
German
war. Yeah, they formed like strong friendships quite often with their host families, and then would
mm,
stay in touch with them afterwards, and there were reunions and that sort of thing. That doesn't happen in my story because, well, for reasons that I'm not going to go into. But yeah, it was like a very interesting thing because, um, yeah, you have the enemy at home with you.
mm.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, there is a tension in that, which is sort of a wonderful thing to be able to use as a writer. Where you obviously get to kind of access that inherent um, distrust. I suppose it's like, oh, can I trust? Can I
Hmm.
trust this relationship? Well, what's going to happen? And it's sort
Hmm.
of a really lovely tool to be able to draw on, I think.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's just such a fraught setup for drama, but then at the same time, people have all of their sort of usual personalities and ways of approaching things, and like you do let your guard down over time.
Mm,
And I don't know, there's something about working on a dairy farm as well. Like it's hard, but there are lots of great things about it. Like you're in the countryside, you feel quite free. Um, you're surrounded by animals. I think like I don't know if anybody else feels this, but they probably do. When I am just in nature, I'm out on a really long walk and I'm somewhere remote, the goings on in the world more generally, and even in my own life, just feel like they matter a lot less.
mm.
Like if I was worried about some work thing, then I don't know, if I'm surrounded by cows, I might be like, it doesn't really matter. Like, these cows are just living their lives. They're not
They're
worried about this.
unencumbered by concerns, prosaic concerns
Yeah,
that they have. The I think,
exactly.
and I think the other thing is hard work bonds, doesn't it? I think when you're, you can completely be at odds with somebody, but if you do engage in hard labor, then you are kind of oddly bonded to them. Yeah, and
Yeah, agreed.
that's something that builds relationships too between the prisoner and his captor, yeah, his captors ostensibly, who actually are largely charitably inclined towards him.
Mhm.
It's wonderfully done. How
Thank
was
you.
this Was it fun doing this? Did you have fun writing it?
Writing this book, yeah, I had a lot of fun. To be honest, it was a really quick book to write. This is my
Mm,
debut novel, but it's not the first book that I've written. I've
mm,
always been writing things. Um, but yeah, I mean, I came up with the idea, or like the seed of the idea, back in 2016, because that was the year of Brexit and President Trump, the first time round, and when a lot of discussions became quite, intense and obviously very black and white and angry. And I was really interested to see the discussions breaking down in that way, and it becoming so difficult to connect with people and communicate over things. And I think over a few years started thinking, well, if I wanted to tell a story about this, and I knew that I wanted to write about family and I wanted to set it in the countryside because that's, I grew up in the countryside. And then I started thinking about dairy farming because it is this vocation that is handed down and inherited, and is really important to um, yeah, like people's sense of self. And it's also incredibly traditional in a lot of ways, and it's full of like gender expectations and um, quite old-fashioned views about our relationship with animals. And I could see that it sort of touched on a lot of like contemporary talking points. So I then decided that I was going to do that, which meant I needed to do loads of research, like I was saying. So then there was a long period where I think I was writing other stuff at the same time, but I was just reading a lot. Um, and then by the time I came to write the book, I had thought about it so much, and I had like a lot of stuff just written down. Like I had an outline, and so I wrote it really quickly. Like it only took me a few months probably to write the whole thing from beginning to end. And it's not a book that changed much in the editing process. The one thing that I'll say is originally the journals were just like a block, like they were all together. They weren't interspersed throughout the rest of the narrative. So, and what happened, I think, is I'm not sure if it got to the point where it was like, here is the journal, George, you can read this. And then he just reads the entire thing. So you are just taken out of the narrative as the reader and thrown into a different narrative. And then you're dropped back into the first one. And my agent and my editor were like, nah, it's better to sort of weave it all in. And actually, that worked really well because um, there were sort of parallels between the narratives that I wasn't even necessarily that aware of when writing it. But when you put sort of chapter by chapter, like, but next to each other, then some of that became much more resonant and more noticeable. So yeah, it was really fun. It was good, and like the editing stuff was pretty painless. It's a lot of copying and pasting, cutting and pasting.
How long did it take from kind of beginning to end, do you think?
What do you mean, the editing or the writing
No,
or?
no, the writing. I think it's a funny one because, like you say, someone was asking me about how long did this take you, and I was like, well, it's not that many words, but the thinking that's gone into it has taken ages, and then the actual writing is not necessarily the longest part of it. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, how long do you think this has occupied you for?
I mean, it is really hard to say because, I mean, as I said, like it started in
Mm.
2016. So that's almost 10 years. That's crazy. But it was not like it was just constant. It's like something that was on the back burner for a long time. I think I wrote it in maybe 2021, which I mean, even that is ages ago. But
Mm.
publishing is a really slow industry, and you have to be very patient. And as I said, like this is my debut, but it's not the first thing that I've written. You have to really want to do this, I think. You have to love it. And luckily, I do love it. I especially love just creating things. And I like creating stuff around the thing as well. So, like, I write the book and then I just enjoy spending time with it. And yeah, I think all of that helps. Like, even taking notes when you're doing research, I just enjoy that. I'm very introverted as well. I like being by myself for long periods of time. Um, yeah, it was a good time.
But then, so you're based up in Newcastle, you know, for the most part, aren't you? And you found a real
Yeah,
community of writers up there. And I went to Newcastle University, and one of my favourite books of the last few years as well is Eliza Clark's Boy Parts, which is mostly set in Newcastle. And I actually just
yeah,
love
that's good.
when books are sort of not set in London, or they have slightly
Oh, so many are
unusual.
set in London.
Yeah, and you just have slightly kind of unusual settings, and you've got the rural setting here, but it's it's nice to see another part of the UK like showcased in work, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I understand why London captures so many people's imaginations, because it's such a diverse and dynamic and fascinating place. But Newcastle is a fascinating place and beautiful. I have written a manuscript set in Newcastle, but it's currently on the shelf, and yeah, maybe I'll do something with it at some point. But yeah, I love it here. So I've lived here since 2013. My husband is a Geordie, and we moved up here together after uni and then after like a stint living in London for a little bit. And yeah, I got accepted into a group through New Writing North, which is this brilliant organization. Um, and it's called the Northeast Novelists. And I joined literally like 2 weeks before I got my book deal. So that felt very serendipitous. Um, And yeah, it's just like a really lovely, supportive group of friends who are mostly published novelists. There are some who are, still trying with their agents. And it can be a really long journey, as I know all too well. And it's lovely to be able to exchange that sort of experience and help each other out, read each other's manuscripts. And New Writing North also put on these workshops for us. So the idea was that it was professional development for creative writers at a certain stage in their careers, because most creative writing stuff is pitched a little bit too low once you're at that level. Um, so yeah, they brought in professional authors and playwrights and people to kind of run sessions with us, and yeah, it was just brilliant. It was an
Was
awesome experience.
where is your literary life in Newcastle? Are there particular bookshops, cafes? It's such a having visited for the first time in a long time, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, and so much had changed, and there was like really sort of, I think it was the Oosburn area where had been totally kind of revitalized. It was just lovely.
Yeah, it is lovely. Yeah. But I don't know, like I have a really nice setup at home here in Walker. I have a nice study where like I feel very self-important surrounded by books. Um, and occasionally. I will go into town to work and just find a cafe or something. I mean, the Waterstones is lovely, and there's like a really great
Mm.
cafes, you know, there often is. But there are some fantastic independent bookshops up here. So Forum Books in Corbridge is amazing, and the Bound in Whitley Bay, where I've got a launch event on Friday, and where I've painted the window. I whenever I go into them, I'm like, oh, I would love to work here. It just seems like such a lovely life. Just
Mm.
yeah. And in terms of like secondhand books, I imagine you know Barter Books in Alnwick up in Northumberland.
You've recommended this to me before, but I've never been.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
but does it have an ice cream shop?
Oh yeah, I mean it's got like so it's an old train station, so all the little waiting rooms and things are cafes and I don't know they're always like fires lit and it's very cozy and you can get food and um oh it's so cool. Yeah. I mean you need to come up and we'll go to Barter Books, definitely.
I'd love to. It sounds incredible. But I loved Newcastle a lot, and it's this very it's a huge area. Like you said, it kind of extends all the way out to the coast, Whitley Bay. But all these places are very distinct, and actually the centre's quite small, so it almost feels quite a kind of
Mm.
homely city, even though it stretches actually quite far. I do have very fond memories of it. So, and it's great to hear that there's like a sort of a scene. There is a bit of a scene going on up there, like books
Oh
wise.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean it's really active because the university also puts a lot of stuff on.
Mm.
So there are lots of literary events. Um, yeah, like I mean I don't manage to go to half of them because there's just so much going on. Um, it's yeah, it's very active, and there are a lot of exciting writers based here who've got like cool stuff coming out. Um, yeah, it's a good place to be. I mean, I'm also in London a lot and travel around a lot because a lot of my friends and family are based down south, and my husband is always traveling for work. So
Mm.
I usually just go with him because I can work anywhere. Yeah, just doing my bits and bobs, whatever I'm working on. Um, and it's nice to have that variety because, as you say, like Newcastle feels quite small, and um, yeah, there's something very cozy about it. Like I love coming home to Newcastle. But
The
yeah, it's
Speaking of, what are you? So this has obviously been finished for a while, given that it's out. So what are you working on? Like, what have you got another book in the pipeline, or are you just
I
where
don't
are
know
you?
how much I can say. I have a couple of things that my agent has, and one of them is actually quite old. So I wrote it back in 2017, and we've been reworking it because it is, without saying too much, it's literary fiction, but it's speculative and it's very different from human animal. But there are some similar themes, and I'm reworking it to sort of make it feel like a more natural follow up to Human Animal because I still really like the story and I think it's very interesting. But I have moved on a little bit as a writer. But we're just not sure whether or not that should be book number two. So we're playing around with that. And then, I mean, I would like it to be, but we'll see.
No,
And then I also have something brand new, which I'm about to send to my agent. I sent her some of it, but it's not quite ready. But yeah, she's ready to see it. So
with that's super interesting. I mean, how much direction do you get? And I suppose what is the pressure for a follow up or for a next work to be similar? I mean, is
mm,
is there any is there a sort of grand reason why something must be like of a type, or like what are
yeah.
the possibilities? I suppose.
So my understanding of it is that it's all about marketing and that you have kind of built a readership with your first book and you want those people to come to it and also some new readers. So you want to bring in some new people, but also the original ones that liked your first one. And what you don't want to do is write something that alienates your initial set of readers, because it's all about that cumulative um, like building of your readers. So um, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think the other side of that is that it can be quite good to show that you are a versatile writer who has range and can do different things, and also not to become um, siloed very early on in your career, because I think that does happen to people where it's just like, no, just keep producing the same story over and over because that's what people want from you. And that's not why I write. Like, I don't write in a sort of transactional way. I I write because I'm interested in the world around me and I want to make sense of it. And it's something fun, right? So I don't want to take that away from it. But I think that, I don't know, my best advice to any authors, and like I'm only just starting out at this in the publishing world, but it's just write whatever you want to write, and not everything will get published. And as long as you know that that's probably going to happen, and like not everything needs to get published, then it's fine, because publishers might choose to curate a very select list that like this is you as an author,
Mm.
but that there's more to it, and there's more to you, and you can enjoy those other projects, and you can still share them with readers if you want, just not
Mm.
through the official publishing channels.
Yeah.
um yeah, I don't know.
No, no, that's it. I think it's a good point, and I've had. I mean, I've met a couple of authors over the last few years who have done debuts and then been really kind of have really run into trouble because I think they've expected that debut to give them a sort of enormous amount of freedom, and when that
Yeah,
freedom's not arrived, they, partly, financially, but also in terms of, right, I'm going to do this and then I can do something totally different, and then they found themselves very trapped, I think. um,
hmm,
Sometimes with their own expectations. It's quite a difficult position to be in, but like you say, there's only,
mm,
you, there are limits, but there are other ways that you can kind of express yourself in the landscape. You don't not everything needs to be published, or published, like you say,
yeah,
traditionally.
yeah.
um
I think it's about like owning your creativity, and remembering that the publishing side of it is the work bit.
mm,
And it's great, but yeah, it is still work, it's business, they're trying to make money,
mm.
fair enough.
Yeah, and the more they make, the more you make too,
Well, that's
Yeah,
true. Yeah.
exactly. So yeah, work wise, where are you going next? You've got some events, you've got Whitley Bay. Like, are you on tour? Are you Yeah, where are you off to?
So I'm actually off to Glasgow tomorrow, because I'm going to the film festival. I'm doing a pitching event, which is going to be really interesting. Um, it's like pitching to producers for screenwrites. Um, yeah, I've got a little bit of experience doing stuff like this, but not much. So it will be interesting. And then I think there's a lot of networking going on, various events that I'm going to go to. And then on Wednesday evening, I have an event with two other debut authors, Rupert Daster and Lucy Rose, here in Newcastle at the Waterstones. And then on Friday, I've got my Whitley Bay launch. And then I think I've got a couple of other London events. I've got the Brunswick East Book Salon, and I've got an event in conversation with Henry Fry at Kirkdale Bookshop. I'm going to Bristol to Max Minerva's, which I'm really looking forward to. And I'm going to the Waterstones Book Club at in Leamington Spa. Um, and I think I've got a few other things going on. But yeah, I'm all over the place. But I actually really need to do some drawings. I've got some commissions that I've been putting off for absolutely ages. I actually need to do them now. So yeah, it's really hard to travel and also do a big pencil drawing. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd imagine it's not quite so simple as just like, typing notes into your phone, is it?
No,
But
exactly.
great to hear you going to Bristol. West Country boy. Love to have it represented. I
Uh-huh.
think Bristol's such a great. It's got so many bookshops. It's got that like sort of independent ethos about the city. So I think
Hmm.
bookshops, there are so many of them, and they do. Yeah, it's great. Like that they do this kind of thing. I think I just love like authors getting out to bookshops and doing those sorts of events because that's just another way of keeping that part of the ecosystem alive. And yeah, I just love it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'm very envious of you on this little tour. It's good fun, even if it's
Like I already went to Bristol a few weeks ago to do book drops. So like in advance of your publication date, you go round and you talk to booksellers and you sort of pitch the book and you give them copies. And funnily enough, like most of them already had the book or already knew about the
really
book, but
nice.
chatted to them anyway. And yeah, Bristol is amazing. Like it has so many bookshops. I mean,
Mm.
Bath also has some absolutely beautiful bookshops.
Yeah, it's got a
Um,
real core of, yeah, one of my favorites, Toppings, and Mr. Beast is
yeah.
great as well. Yeah, they're very. Bath's got a couple, but yeah, do you know, Bristol's just a bigger
Hmm.
place, isn't it?
Bristol's got the one. There's one on a boat. Is that Bristol? Or am I
Uh,
thinking of somewhere else?
well, there's the one in King's Cross. You think of that one, book barge or book on a
No,
boat? Uh,
no, I know that one. There's somewhere else. I think it was Bristol. I'll have a look after this.
that sounds quite Bristol. I really like, is it Book House down in the new bit on the waterfront south of the river in Bristol, down in the SS Great Britain.
Oh, yeah, I do remember that. Yeah.
That's a good shop. Yeah, yeah. Well, Seth, won't keep you too much longer. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the masses on Substack?
Um, I guess just if you want to check out my literary themed artwork or follow me for any book updates, then I'm on Instagram at Seth Insua. And that's where I am. I'm not really anywhere else at the moment.
That's yeah, well, I'll get this all summarized up so it's here for people to see. I'll put some links in, but I really love Seth's book Human Animal. It was this kind of, it takes these issues and it explores them like in such a sort of sensitive and nuanced manner that actually, yeah, it was a work of great sympathy, I thought. And also the mystery, like I said to you before, I was really kind of gripped to read to the end. It's one of those where it's getting late and I've got, I don't know, 40, 50 pages left. And you're just like, well, I'm not going to put this down now. I really want to find out what happens. So
Oh,
that was really well done.
thank you.
I really recommend everybody check it out. And yeah, thank you for joining us and have a wonderful Sunday.
Thank you so much. You too.
See you later. Bye, bye, bye.
Bye.